Hello, everyone. Welcome back again. We're going to continue our theme of sustainability with another very important and major project for Teesside. The talk is the UK's first decarbonised industrial cluster, and I'm really pleased to welcome Colin McGill, Project Director of Net Zero Teesside, to tell us all about it. Okay, Colin, thank you.
Thanks very much, Philip, and thank you all for joining. Just share my screen with you. So I hope you can all see that. So thank you for joining. I'm going to tell you a little bit about Net Zero Teesside. But before I do that, I'm going to give you a little bit of context about why it's important. So carbon capture and storage is going to be vital to meet the climate targets for the world. The IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, estimated that somewhere between 5 to 10 billion tons of CO2 will be required to be disposed of each year if we're going to meet the target goal of 2 degrees, and even more if we go for 1.5 degrees. And the most important product from NZT is not actually the project itself, although that's very important. It's actually the business models behind those. And if you ask yourselves why previous attempts at CCUS have failed, not just in the UK, but across the world, they've all failed for the same reason, which has been lack of government support for that. And if we get business models which allow companies to invest and get a return on investment, that will actually cause CCUS to be applied at scale in the UK, but also around the world. The UK has led the way with contract for difference power pricing offshore, for example, and that model has been picked up by other jurisdictions. And when I presented this talk in various places around the world, I often get talked to afterwards by the local regulators who are very interested in what's happening, and they're interested to know whether or not they can apply the same models in their country. So if we can actually get those business models in place, it will allow them to be applied at scale in the UK, but more importantly, they'll be picked up and applied around the world. And a very good example of that is the UK's decision last year to commit to being net zero by 2050. As a result of that, 50% of the world's GDP has already planned to be net zero by 2050. And that was before we had announcements from Korea and China in the past few years. And I'm sure we're going to get something from the US shortly as well. And of course, if we are going to be net zero by 2050, any hydrocarbons that are produced are going to have CCUS backing them up to allow that to be placed in a net zero world. So what about the UK? The table on the left here is taken from a report from the UK Committee on Climate Change, which was the basis of the commitment to net zero by 2050. And it's analysing what the UK energy system will look like by 2050. And the big takeaways are huge demand in increase of power. Essentially, you're moving from sort of gas and oil power to electrically powered. So that's for electric vehicles and hybrid heat pumps. And that's largely powered by renewables. There's also a very significant hydrogen demand. The hydrocarbon use overall has gone down. There's virtually no oil. There's no cars anymore. But there is some gas demand, about 3/4 of today's use. That's partly for gas power generation, partly for hydrogen, and partly for use in industry, either as a feedstock or for heating purposes. And there's also a very significant requirement for CCUS. It's about 9 BCF a day, which again, roughly is about equivalent to what's required in today's gas system. And as you can see, the mixture there, it's made up from a mixture of power generation from hydrogen. The one slide which is also very interesting is from the CO2 from BECCS and biofuel. So that would actually be negative emissions if that's captured. And that's important because in order to meet net zero, the UK is going to need some buffer. It's going to need some negative emissions to cover things which are just impossible or very expensive to decarbonise. Things like agriculture are much harder to decarbonise than industry, for example. And having a negative buffer there will be quite important. In the UK, the conditions for UK CCUS are very positive. We've got the commitment last year. In the budget this year, there was support for at least 800 million for CCUS projects, and it also included support for a gas-fired power station supported by consumer subsidies, which at the moment NZT is the only project that falls into that category. Net Zero Teesside, and in fact all the other carbon capture and storage clusters, are by their nature in areas where there is a significant industrial presence, and they tend to be in areas which are being targeted for the government for the levelling up agenda, and that applies even more so after COVID. So a lot of people said, well, surely the government's not going to have any money to spend on this after the COVID-19 pandemic. Actually, that doesn't appear to be the case. The government is actually very keen. They realise that after the pandemic, they're going to have to try and kickstart the economy. And so green infrastructure projects are a fantastic way to do that. And it's likely we're going to hear more from the government in the next week or so about that. So what about Teesside? Why is Teesside chosen? Why did the companies behind this project choose Teesside for its location? And there are a number of reasons. Firstly, technically, it's a compact site, as I'm sure you all know. This is an old ICI site. It's very integrated and it's very compact. It's only a few kilometres across, compared to, say, Humber, which is 80 kilometres from side to side. So that makes it much easier to build a gathering system for the CO2. More importantly, though, there's very strong local political and industrial support. You can see all the names of the companies here who have signed MOUs and NDAs with us. There's a lot of companies here who are very keen to decarbonise their products, and particularly you've got BOC and CF Industries who produce high concentrations of CO2 as a byproduct of their current processes. And that gives you a very good base to have low-cost carbon capture available for the project early on. What's also interesting is if you look at the emissions from Teesside, there's about 3 million tonnes of carbon dioxide emitted by industry every year, which is reported to the EU trading scheme, and money and taxes are paid on that. But what's also interesting is that there is, or will shortly be, 3 million tonnes from bioenergy and power from waste plants. As we've talked about earlier, if we capture the CO2 from those, it gives you negative emissions and negative carbon electricity. There's also a little bit of spare capacity in the hydrogen plant in Billingham, and there's a sort of hydrogen distribution system around the site. So it may be a very interesting place to actually try out fuel switching. It's probably the most CapEx and OpEx effective way of doing that in the UK. And it's also going to be underpinned by a dispatchable power system. So the UK is going to grow hugely its renewable energy system, and we should. It's the cheapest way of providing power to the UK. But of course, it's not always windy. It's not always sunny. And so having some form of low carbon power supply that you can turn on when you need it, when it's not windy, is absolutely vital for the UK energy system. And we've done a lot of modelling work on this now, and it's going to be about 50 billion cheaper to decarbonise the UK if we actually have dispatchable power captured from CCUS, capturing CCUS from carbon from power stations. So if this all goes to plan, we think we can create the world's first decarbonised industrial hub. We can see a way to do this as early as 2030. It really just depends on the level of government policy support to enable that to happen. But it's entirely feasible, and it's probably the only place that you can do it as rapidly as this. And it's at least partly because of the fact we've got so much negative emissions available to us. It'll be the world's first dispatchable low carbon power from gas. That's never been done before. And it'll be the world's first negative carbon electricity. That hasn't been done before, although that may get snatched from us by Norway, because they're about to capture some CO2 from a power plant as part of Northern Lights. We've also announced recently the formation of the Northern Endurance Partnership. So there's obviously another industrial cluster at Humberside, and they're looking to decarbonise as well. And we both want to use the same store to store the CO2. which is called the Endurance Reservoir in the North Sea. So it's a saline water formation. We've agreed that we're going to form a joint company to take the carbon dioxide from both areas and inject it into the same store. And then as that gets full, we've identified a range of potential future places to put the carbon dioxide afterwards. And so we're imagining that extending out to other locations in the North Sea. It's also interesting, there's about 350 million tonnes of carbon dioxide every year that is emitted from CO2 sources from industry on the coast of Europe. And they don't, by and large, have access to places to put the carbon dioxide. So we can offer a service to them by taking their CO2 and storing it. So that's another opportunity for the partnership to consider. I guess very importantly, though, this project has the capability of really adding to the local economy. During the construction period of this project, we're going to be adding something like about £400 million a year in gross value add and 4,500 jobs between the period of 2024 to 2028 during the construction period. And if that unlocks CCUS around the UK, that's going to grow to a significantly bigger prize. So the prize for the country is going to be about 1.6 billion and 18,000 direct jobs. And if we can really take advantage of the first mover position we've got here to build a very strong export industry around this, that could add a further billion and a further 13,000 direct jobs and potentially more as we go beyond that. So potentially very exciting way of creating jobs and value for the UK industry, UK economy as well. And with that, I will say thank you and see if there are any questions.
Thank you, Colin. That was excellent insight, great presentation. Thank you very much. And not only the fact that it's very good for the economy, very sustainable, but from the economic impact that could be possible as well, which is equally exciting. Anyone have a question for Colin that I could put to him?
So there are a couple of comments I can see here. How can the suppliers interested in the pre-feed and feed packages planned for next year register interest? So, as you mentioned there, we are aiming to go into feed at the middle of next year, and then if we're successful, we will go into execute at the beginning of 2023. If you go to the Net Zero Teesside site, there's an opportunity for any supplier to register their interest. And that will get passed along to our supply chain director, who is recording all the interest and is contracting parties as they are so interested. As you can imagine, the next phase is largely about design, although there will be some work looking at the site and preparing the site for use. There's another question from Colin Robinson, so thank you, Paul, for that. Colin Robinson has asked, other than the offshore power and CO2 pipeline, what other infrastructure is necessary to enable this? And the answer is that there isn't really any infrastructure beyond that that's required to enable this. You essentially need a compression station onshore to take the CO2, you need a gathering system, you need a pipeline to transport it offshore, and you need some wells to inject it into the underground structure. At some time in the future, we will start to produce a bit of brine to make more space in the reservoir. But that's kind of the infrastructure that we require that's there. Other than that, it's actually about each industry thinking about what's required, what's the best way for them to decarbonise their own industry, and then plug into the gathering system that hopefully will run very close to their boundary fence. Claire Moss, do you have a programme of works that's available for the local supply chain? Not yet, Claire. We're still working on our supply chain strategy. So at the moment, we're very interested in people registering, but it's a little bit too early for us to have anything that detailed.
Okay, thanks, Colin. Are there any more questions for Colin?
There's one from Jamie about how to register. Yes, you can. Let me see if I can find a link and paste it in. You can look at the Net Zero Teesside site and register there.
And I'm sure also that when opportunities arrive, that NEPIC will share those from Net Zero Teesside to our membership as well. Okay.
The next question is very specific. Do you know of anyone with an interest in developing plasmonic catalysis for CO2 to methanol and methane? I'm afraid I don't, and I'm afraid know what plasmonic catalysis is. So apologies for that, but no.
Okay, any more questions for Colin? Okay, excellent, Colin. Thank you very much.
There's a question from Tim Daniels.
All right.
If you are forcing out brine, could contamination be an issue? This isn't actually an old oil reservoir. This is actually just a sand formation that would have been an oil reservoir had it received gas or oil, but it didn't receive a charge. There was no way of putting oil and gas into it. So it's just filled with brine. So the only thing you're doing is taking brine and putting more brine back into the brine sea, which is obviously brine. So there won't be contamination from that we have to worry about. We are worried about the impacts of brine and making sure that's safe, but there's no contamination from chemicals or oil, which we have to worry about.
And there's no concern about CO2 leaking out of that reservoir, Colin?
We've done an awful lot of studies on that. We know from analog reservoirs in the same formation that the seal is very good. And actually there are multiple seals to this reservoir. So above the main seal, which is a shale, there's actually layers of salt, layers of shale, and layers of salt. So even if there's a leak in the first one, we're very confident it will get picked up by the second and third one. And beyond that, we will actually have a very strong monitoring program agreed with the regulator in advance to track the CO2 movement, see where it goes, and have got interventions ready in the event that it moves in a way where.
Okay. Is one other question, Colin? In terms of the capacity that's planned, will there be excess capacity? So if we are able to attract new industry, then there would be enough for new emitters of CO2?
Absolutely. We're building the export pipeline to be sized for at least 10 million tonnes, and it might be able to go a little beyond that. So at the moment, there's about 6 million tonnes being emitted from Teesside, so there is definitely room to expand. We have had at least 2 or 3 companies come to us and say, look, if you build this, we are interested in coming to Teesside specifically because we can decarbonise our product and that will give us an advantage. So yes, we are definitely building extra capacity in there to allow us to do that. And it is attracting interest from industries to come to Teesside specifically for that.
Excellent news. Great. Okay, well, if there's no more questions, I just want to say thanks again for an excellent presentation, for a really exciting, another very exciting project, which is very positive for the economy and the environment on Teesside. So if you would like to see Colin, I'm sure he'll go to his VIP area, but you can also go to the lobby and ask him questions via that system as well. So our next presentation will be at 11:30. And it's from Ian Crenshaw from the CIA, who's going to talk about Brexit. So hope to see you there. Thank you very much. Thanks again, Colin.